Hi everyone, and thank you for coming to our webinar today. Just to introduce myself, I am Dan George. I'm the Creative Director at Aspectus Group, the independent communications consultancy that helped Ayming to develop the International Innovation Barometer this year. We are really excited to have you here at the launch of the Barometer. I know firsthand how much work the team has put into this, and I think everybody is really very proud of the results. We've got a robust discussion lined up for everyone today, so do listen, do ask questions, and of course do join in the conversation on social media. You can see some of the details on the slide there below. But first, just before we get started, I'll hand over now to Martin Hook, who is Ayming's Managing Director of the UK and Ireland, just to run through what you can expect from the session.
Great, thanks Dan. Good afternoon everyone, and thanks very much for joining us today as we present the second annual Innovation Barometer brought to you by our Innovation Lab, the Ayming Institute. We're very proud of this year's report, which takes a deep dive into global innovation trends and couldn't come at a more important time. As we sit here today, we all know the world is struggling to cope with the economic and social implications of the coronavirus crisis. It's perhaps not unreasonable to say that research and development has never been more important in our search for a vaccine. Innovation is ultimately humanity's best hope to protect both lives and the economy. And while the pandemic is applying some pressure to budgets overall, the picture remains one of hope and positivity. As technology continues to evolve, it unlocks new and exciting solutions to our world of challenges, and new funding opportunities are beginning to emerge. But the companies using these opportunities, we're questioning, are they using them sustainably to build a better future? Let's also not forget, coronavirus isn't the only crisis facing the planet at this time. The climate conundrum looms as large as ever, and innovation again holds the key to escaping its worst effects. So what's driving such efforts, and what needs to happen to improve businesses' ability to sustainably innovate? In this year's Barometer, we answer all of these questions and more, as well as looking a little deeper into the state of innovation today and how best we can fund it into tomorrow. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's discussion, where we hope to dig a little deeper into all these topics. I've got a fantastic panel here, equipped and excited to give you both an insight into the results this year and the information that you can really make the most of in our report. We encourage you to read the report after this session if you haven't already, discuss it with others, and hope it sparks some new ideas and constructive conversations. Thank you. Back to you, Dan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. We keep saying the word proud, but I really do think in this case that it is an appropriate one. Last year's Barometer was very warmly received, and it helped a number of businesses to make real life decisions about how best to undertake innovation and how best to finance it. And this year, I think we hope to make an even bigger impact. And we hope that today's discussion provides the audience with some really useful and actionable insights that you can take home with you. But before we get going, how will that work? First, what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a debate. This will begin in a second. And we've got a great panel for that session, who I will introduce you to in a moment. And then, of course, after that debate, we'll make some time for questions from you in the audience. We'll have about 15 minutes set aside for this at the end of the call, so please do submit any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. It will be very exciting, I think, to put the speakers here on the spot a little bit. And I am very excited, as I said, to introduce these panelists to you. First up, we have Mark Smith, the Partner for Innovation Incentives at Ayming UK. Joining him, we have Laura Delgado, the Partner at Ayming Spain, and Thomas Folsom, the Managing Director at Ayming USA. This is a team that was very heavily involved in the creation of this report, so I'm really excited personally to hear what they have to say, and I hope that everyone in the audience is as well. Without further ado then, we'll get started with the first question. And I want to start by addressing a bit of an elephant in the room. One of the report's early findings this year was an increase in international innovation. In spite of the geopolitical upheaval we've seen in recent years, firms are more and more looking overseas for their innovation partners. Mark, my question to you is, why do you think this is? And can this trend continue in a post-pandemic world, or do you think that we're set to see a bit more localization take its place instead?
Thanks, Dan. I picked up a couple of other trends in the barometer that I'd like to highlight that I think will probably be contributing to further internationalization of R&D. First is access to talent, and secondly, companies increasingly looking to existing locations to invest in R&D. You know, it's people that do R&D. You know, AI hasn't taken that over just yet, and so companies are going to look to invest in R&D where they've got access to talented individuals. As well as that, it's going to be cheaper and easier for companies to invest in R&D where they're already located. So companies are located in jurisdictions with talented workforce at a reasonable cost. It would make sense to invest in R&D there. Another thing that we've all seen this year is increasing use of remote working tools. I think companies have realized that, you know, they can be just as effective, if not more effective, working remotely. So companies are investing more in remote working technology and tools, and the companies developing those tools, you know, they're investing more in their development. You know, I guarantee Microsoft Teams has had far more updates this year than was originally planned for 2020. So that's giving companies increasing confidence that they can work effectively across borders and work remotely. So that would be leading to increased internationalization of R&D. But on the flip side, though, you know, there are drivers that are forcing companies to look more locally for R&D, and it's more than just economic nationalism. I think, you know, people are inherently social, and you know, R&D is best done through collaboration. You know, that spontaneous interaction with your colleague that sparks an idea, that's much more likely to happen over a coffee in the office than it is over a Zoom or a Teams call, for instance. And obviously, business travel has been hugely curtailed this year. So, you know, if I'm looking to start a new project this year, I think, you know, I'd be looking to start that project locally. As well as that, I think the pandemic has exposed a lot of weaknesses in global supply chains. And another trend that was picked up in the barometer was companies increasingly looking to their supply chain for R&D. So if you're increasingly localizing your supply chain and looking to that for R&D, it's just natural that it follows that your R&D is going to become more localized. So, you know, there are clearly trends on both sides, both pushing for more internationalization of R&D and for more localization of R&D. But on balance, I think I would tend more to see more internationalization of R&D. For me, access to talent is definitely the biggest and most important driver for R&D. And I think that's going to increasingly have companies looking abroad for the best talent to take on their projects.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And moving on slightly, Laura, in the report, we suggest that while tax credits are the most popular option among companies looking to boost their R&D spending, they could prove even more popular if governments could simplify them perhaps just a little bit. What do you think that would look like? I guess, how could governments make their programs to incentivize innovation more streamlined and perhaps more effective?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and hi, everyone. In my opinion, an effective R&D tax scheme needs to have the balance in the application process between complexity and security. Normally, both businesses and governments are too much focused in demanding a very solid application process, and it is well known that too much bureaucracy leads to a less effective regime, and usually to a perception of not enough security. On the opposite, it is proven that a good and streamlined R&D tax regime boosts private and collaborative innovation in all countries. And for instance, in Ayming, we publish annually a report that is named the Benchmark, that includes a comparison between R&D tax regimes across OECD countries, comparing not only how attractive these incentives are in terms of funding rates, but also in terms of complexity. This is very important. And what we see is that countries with higher rates of R&D expenditures versus GDP have also better or more streamlined R&D and innovation tax regimes and simpler application processes. So I would say, as a conclusion, if I was a policymaker, I would try not to lose the main purpose of these policies, that at the end is incentivizing R&D and innovation, while trying also to put in place an application process where companies feel they can claim their credits with security, with all security. So this is what I would say.
Thank you very much. So I think that security point is absolutely critical at times like this. Another thing that I found really fascinating personally in the report was the changing nature of innovation funding. So one thing that we noticed was that equity or debt funding is up by about 6% compared to last year's barometer, and crowdfunding is up by almost 1/5. Thomas, I suppose what I wanted to ask you is, what do you make of this? Do you think this trend is here to stay? And if so, what do you think that means for innovation? Is crowdfunding an exciting new income stream, or do you think companies are now perhaps slightly at the whim of the public when it comes to chasing meaningful improvements?
Well, thank you for the questions, and thank you for joining us today, everyone. It's a couple of questions, so I'll try and take them in hand. What do I make of it? Well, I think it's easy to find and easy to access. In the past, funding may not have been so easy. Now you can just turn on your favorite internet browser and find access to crowdfunding at a minimum. Many of those with great ideas didn't always have a PE firm on their speed dial or somewhere they could turn, and even if they did have access to them, though they may have a great idea, they may not have the time or the resources to put together the necessary presentation in order to woo over that private equity. So I think it's a great way to add additional funding to what's already there. Is it here to stay? I think so, particularly with the ease of access, the number of available investors, and feel-good stories that you hear around the internet and on the news. I know Americans love to root for the small guy, for the little company, and that's where a lot of this is going. So that's great. And one thing to keep in mind, crowdfunding isn't new. It's newly made easy through innovation, such as these applications on the internet, but crowdfunding's been around for decades, maybe even centuries. Folks turn to Aunt Kay. They talk to their old college buddy who hit it big and has some money that's available to invest, right? Even war bonds were a form of crowdfunding that's been used in a sense. So what does that mean for innovation? I think it means more funding, more availability of funding, more access to funding. So absolutely, I think it's exciting, and perhaps for some, but remains a traditional. Perhaps for some, it's not perfect, but it is another avenue for funding, and there always remains the traditional ways of funding.
Brilliant. So crowdfunding, it's been here for a long time. It's here to stay, and that fundamentally is really great news for innovation.
I think so.
Thanks. And something else that we talked about a bit while putting together the report was the increase in companies acquiring innovative smaller firms as an alternative form of investment. Laura, what do you think is driving this, and do you think it's set to continue?
Yes, indeed. The need for technology is also influencing innovation processes. Although internal R&D resource is most relied on, companies are less likely to rely on it exclusively. You need to think that things are getting extraordinarily complex, and most innovation now requires complicated technology that companies do not have in-house. So at the end, they must look externally for additional capabilities. So yes, this is set to continue, in my opinion, and to increase in all countries. But not only the acquisition of smaller businesses that but the collaboration with startups and scale-ups, because at the end, open innovation is a way to innovate much more dynamic, flexible, agile, that connects large businesses better with the needs of society. So in a global, digital, and dynamic world, innovation needs to be rapid and flexible, and smaller businesses are for sure the answer to the challenges that larger corporations are facing. So in my opinion, the future success for companies is in the good balance between private and public collaboration on the one hand, and large and smaller businesses partnerships. So yes, indeed, it's set to continue, in my opinion.
Fantastic, thanks a lot for that. And I just want to give a reminder out to the audience to do submit your own questions as well. I can see a couple of them coming through on my screen over there, but there's certainly going to be time to get to quite a few for you. So if you do have any questions, either posed from your reading of the report already or from the discussion that we have going on here, then do please feel free to submit them, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. Mark, this year's report takes a bit of a closer look at the subject of sustainability. And it's clear to me that R&D still has some work to go on this subject. I mean, only 7% of respondents said that they spend more than half of their innovation budgets on what they call sustainable projects, with a further third spending between 1% and 10%. My question to you is, how much does this matter? Is sustainable development important? And if so, whose responsibility do you think it is to see that these figures improve by the next time we ask the question?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, for me, sustainable development is absolutely vital. I think it's pretty clear that we're facing an existential crisis. You know, we are consuming natural resources much faster than they can be replenished. We're polluting the environment. We're destroying natural habitats. And I think sustainable development, sustainable R&D is absolutely required to solve these challenges. For companies, you know, with the right strategy and right R&D, this can really be an opportunity. You know, an example that immediately sprung to mind was the Blue Planet 2 documentary a couple of years ago. You know, almost overnight in the UK, people stopped using single-use plastics. You know, for some companies, they lost revenue, obviously, but for other companies, it was an opportunity to develop new products. You know, even simple things like wooden cutlery or reusable coffee cups. You know, companies that seize the opportunity gain new customers. You know, keeping with the Attenborough theme, I watched his recent documentary on Netflix, Life on Our Planet, and following that, I made a change of energy supplier to a green energy supplier, and it was actually cheaper than my existing supplier. So, you know, I think consumer demand is clearly changing. Governments also have a role to play as well, I think, and a sector that you see both governments and consumers impacting behavior is the automotive sector. You've got Tesla this year becoming the world's most valuable automotive company, despite the fact that they produce a fraction of the vehicles that their rivals do. As well as that, it was in the news just recently that VW have agreed to sell Bugatti to a company called Rimac, which is a small Croatian electric hypercar manufacturer. I'm sure most people on this call have probably never heard of them. That deal is all about technology. VW don't want to be investing in 1,000 horsepower petrol engines anymore. They want access to battery technology, to electric vehicle technology. So, you know, in summary, I think really to make a big improvement in sustainable R&D, I think it really requires everybody. You know, consumers need to continue to vote with their wallet. Governments need to continue to legislate and regulate. And businesses need to see the obvious direction of travel, need to invest more in sustainable R&D, or they risk being left behind.
Fantastic. And one thing that your answer touched on there, I think, really correlated with one of our findings in the barometer, which is that the primary pressure for sustainability seems to come absolutely from a desire to improve business performance. So businesses think that if they undertake sustainable development, their business will perform better. No doubt that pressure is a good thing, but do you think it's healthy for that to be the main pressure, the main driver of sustainability? Or do you think that some sort of deeper factors ought to come a bit more into play?
Well, look, everybody's got their, their own set of morals and what they look for in what they do day to day. But businesses are still predominantly set up to make money, and so I don't really see any conflict personally between making money and benefiting the environment and sustainable development. In fact, I see it really is the direction of travel. Running a business now, you absolutely must get on board, because businesses aren't always going to be around forever, and the successful businesses that keep being successful, they keep innovating, and they seize upon those new market opportunities. So really, I think it's vital to long-term survival for businesses to invest in sustainable R&D, and if that's improving business performance, that is obviously the right thing for people to be doing.
Great. Following on from this, Thomas, one of the key takeaways from the report this year was that governments need to work a bit better to define what counts as sustainable innovation. It appears that perhaps there is a bit of confusion around the definition of sustainability when it comes to driving R&D, and that only once we've got that definition really tight and really consistent, can governments properly implement the programs to incentivize R&D at the levels that they want to see. My question to you, in light of this, is what criteria would you like to see added to the list if you were to define R&D for governments to try and incentivize as much of it as possible?
Sure. Well, I think we have a problem with, we don't know the whole picture. So I'd like to see an easy to use sustainability scale. And what I mean by that is I want to emphasize easy to use. A scale with a scoring process and a report that the average individual can understand. Comparable scales would include the terror alert scale that we used in the early 2000s, or the COVID red, orange, yellow, and green systems. When we know that it's at orange, for example, there's a certain percent of COVID new cases in the area. So I think we need to have something like that. For new buildings, we have the LEED program, but I don't really know. When I walk into a building and I see it's LEED Platinum or LEED Gold, I really don't know what that means, because it's such a convoluted scale. I know, for example, Elon Musk makes a nice automobile that doesn't directly release CO2. And so it's been marketed very well as being a sustainable automobile. But where did he purchase his lithium? What does the impact of the lithium mine and the extraction process look like? What does the environment around them and the people that live and work around it look like? What is their quality of life around that area? And then you look at, well, you have to charge them. So where does the electricity come from? And people will point to the fact that, well, it's a low carbon footprint because they come from a sustainable wind farm. But where do all those worn out windmills go to when they're worn out? My understanding is that there isn't a recycle program for them, or even my understanding is the blades are not recyclable at all, what I've recently done in some of my research. So is it really a sustainable wind farm when you look at those aspects? We don't really know. The end consumer doesn't know. So again, Tesla's done well. We all think that Tesla's a sustainable car, but when you look at independent reviews, it actually shows that the Ford C-Max, when it was being produced, was the most sustainable automobile. So I think that it's very important that we have an easy to use sustainability scale, not just for manufactured products, but we should have it for products that we buy at the grocery store. We know what the calories are and how much sugar is in it, and so on and so forth, because there's an easy to read label on the back of every jar or can or package of whatever we purchase. So I know and I trust the tomatoes that I grow in my backyard, but just because it says sustainable on the label, I really don't know what that means on the food that I purchase at the market. So I think there needs to be a consistent definition, and it needs to have an easy to use scale that is easy for all of us to understand, start to finish, if you will, what sustainability means.
That's great. I really like the idea of this visual kind of easy to use scale. It's a bit like a spice rating you might get on the back of a bottle of hot sauce that really tells me which one to avoid and which one might be safe for me to buy. Just another reminder to the audience that we are doing quite well for time. So if you have questions that you want to submit, we will absolutely get to as many of them as we possibly can. In the meantime, I'm just going to send a couple of, we've got time for a couple more questions to the floor. This next one I'm going to pose to the group, so any of you feel free to answer. Traditionally, sustainability arguments have been framed in terms of a binary choice between profits on the one hand and the planet on the other. But this year, perhaps more than ever before, we've learned to travel and to consume less, while adopting new working practices that have helped to keep the economy running in spite of this kind of reduced travel and reduced consumption. My question is, what lessons can businesses take from the past year around the role of innovation and helping to bridge this gap between people and profit? And I'll open that up to any of you to answer if you feel confident. Otherwise, I might pick on somebody.
You can go.
Okay.
Yes, building on what Mark said before, usually profit is often put before planet. So, but the two can coexist. So demand is high for solutions to the climate crisis, and business innovation is desperately needed to transform the global economy into a circular one and avoid climate catastrophe. So, from a forward-thinking perspective, we also ask respondents, for instance, in the report, about what would help them to do more sustainable R&D. And once again, government intervention was something that, on the one hand, from an American perspective, regulation was positively seen. Then it's really unfavorable in the rest of the countries, while they are more positive with the incentivization of sustainable innovation. So companies are asking for incentivization apart from regulation. So this is something that we need to bear in mind, more from the policymakers' perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, many of those in attendance will be going back to their desks later and working on finalizing their budgets for 2021. I'd like to know from each of you which bit of advice audience members can take from this year's report that you think that they should put into action. Perhaps, Mark, if we start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw a lot of positive trends in the report this year, but we were obviously conducting the survey just as the coronavirus was almost at its peak, or certainly its first peak, rather. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and you know, with uncertainty there could be a temptation to retrench, and I'd say really, you know, I'd advise people to sort of avoid that temptation to retrench and to be too cautious. To actually do the opposite, be bold, you know, look for those new opportunities, look to invest, look to develop more, because I think, you know, the businesses that are going to be successful after the pandemic are the ones that, you know, were bold, that look to seize opportunities and grow out of the crisis rather than retrench and cut back.
Great, and Laura, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I fully agree with Mark. I would add that you should include a good public funding plan in your budget. And for the EU-based companies that are here joining us today, bear in mind the next generation EU instrument. It's very important that this is going to be defined these days by your country governments. It's very important that you check that your projects and capital expenditures plan are in line with this 750 billion euros that the EU is going to give to all member states in the next years. For instance, at Ayming, we are already helping our clients to check if their strategies and their budgets are in line with this new world of possibilities and opportunities, so their projects can be in a better position to be considered. So this is very important.
Right, and finally, Thomas, have you any thoughts?
Certainly. The way I would describe it is tenacity. Many entrepreneurs, business people, they go after sales with tenacity, new business with tenacity. They go after developing new products, pushing their product, marketing with much energy and tenacity. They should know that there are resources for funding out there, and they should go after those resources that they deserve. Many of those resources are untapped. There's grants that go unclaimed. There are research credits that don't get put on the tax return or don't get submitted to the local governments. And so if you need or want this funding, you must go after it. You have to find it, and you should designate someone in your company if you don't have time yourself. If you don't have the bandwidth to do so, then you should find an expert to help you find those funding.
Great, and there seems to be a nice a key theme coming through all of these responses, that you know, fortune favors the bold. People shouldn't be shy when it comes to innovating. As Martin said, I suppose at the very beginning of this session, innovation represents perhaps the best our best tool for kind of getting through this crisis and coming out on the other side on the front foot, ready to move forwards. And I think that's a brilliant message to end the first part of this session on. And I thank you for all of your insights there. I know I've found it super interesting. I learned a lot, and I helped you guys to work on the report itself. So I hope the audience has found the same. And now it is the audience's turn. We've already had a few rather interesting questions submitted. What we're going to do is I will pick a few of these questions and ask them to the group. Do feel free, everyone on the panel, to dive in and answer any of these questions. I will shy away from picking on anyone individually too much. And of course, if you have something to add to anybody that has already answered, then feel free to do that as well. We'll start with one, which is, what simple top-line tips would you give to businesses to increase innovation? Okay, let's start with Thomas.
Well, I think that's part of what this entire discussion is about, to increase innovation. Top-line tips: first of all, you got to make sure it's funded. If it's funded, then you can go after anyone you want. You can go after the top minds in your industry, or bring in new minds from other industry that could spark a new idea that hasn't been thought about in your industry. If you don't have the funding, you're kind of stuck in the water.
Okay. And Marco, Laura, do you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, Dan, I'd say that there's definitely innovation that you can unlock in your existing organization. I'm sure every employee within the organization has got lots of great ideas. So you should think to how do you best unlock that nascent energy and enthusiasm for innovation within your business. Freeing people up to spend a bit of time to explore new ideas, making sure that those ideas get heard, and helping colleagues collaborate. That's definitely going to help spur innovation from within.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would definitely look at the innovation funnel and check in all stages if you are doing you're optimizing each of the phases, looking for more stakeholders in the ecosystem. It's very important that we've talked about in open innovation before. It's very important. And then again, to get public funding, not only private, but also public funding plan for this. So this is what I would say.
Thank you. And the next question, as far as suppliers could be heavily impacted by COVID, do you think that innovation could be slowed down due to possible increases of lead times on materials? Laura,
Sure.
what do you, oh, sorry. Thomas, were you jumping in there?
It's okay. No, I would say it is in the report. So yeah, actually, even if we find that some of the respondents are saying that they're decreasing their investment, it's only the majority is not. So definitely something that happened with the pandemic is there is more awareness about the importance and the impact of innovation and sustainability. So maybe this is set to be a trend, hopefully, and be increasing, and the budgets also. Thomas, your turn.
Well, I think we've already seen that it can decrease it, but for certain companies and industries. But one thing that we have seen is that other industries have really embraced the issues, and they've developed some amazing products. I saw a product out of Australia recently advertised in my social media feed. It was an apparatus to help you breathe, and they were obviously trying to understand where the market was, and they were looking for funding. It was actually a crowdfunding advertisement. So I think there's opportunities out there, even though there may be some delays due to funding or to supply chain management.
Right. And we've got a question on your big vision for sustainability. We've been asked, what is your vision for sustainability, and when will we see that companies really care about it? Mark, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I can pick this one up. I think Laura mentioned it in one of her answers, and that was the circular economy. I think at the moment we're all too focused on what we can produce, with no real thought about what goes into it or what happens afterwards. And I think we live in an incredibly complex world, and it's there is so much information out there, and you couldn't possibly understand every product as a consumer, what goes into it, how to recycle it properly. What are your sustainability options? It's just a complete minefield. So I think we need an awful lot more information and so more research, so that the people, not just consumers, but businesses themselves as well, really understand, what goes into everything they do. It is all well and good, and people have got great ambitions to be sustainable, but we need that information to help people make sustainable decisions, be that in private consumers or in business.
I can see some nodding in agreement there. So, and what is the panel's view on innovation that's taking place in retail at the moment, post-COVID? With, I suppose that the question here is about e-commerce and sustainability becoming more mainstream. What do you think of the future of that innovation?
Again, I go. Yeah, it's a trend. Well, actually, technology is something that we have already talked about. Is in the whole report. It's very important. So in this case, retail and for sure e-commerce is something to be continue increasing and could be the answer to the future challenges. So yes, I would say that. Thomas?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for companies to recreate themselves. I think there are certain products that people are more opposed to purchasing online. So I think it gives some of the big box retailers an open area to recreate themselves and still survive. At the same time, I think we can become more efficient as far as the online retailers. Since COVID, I've been sitting in my front room at my house looking out at the street, and I can't even count the number of delivery trucks that pass up and down my street. It is literally, you can't count it. And so there, you talk about sustainability, you've got 100 trucks coming up and down the street to deliver a little tiny package. I think there's much room to improve on that aspect.
Yeah, that's definitely been something on my mind, Thomas, when I'm answering the door for the 4th or 5th time that day for another package, because that, that last mile to the door is often where you have the most greenhouse gas emissions for some products. So something that sort of really occurred to me, with innovation in retail, is e-commerce has traditionally been the preserve of your largest retailers. But a lot of small producers and small retailers have really had to adapt with the pandemic. And one thing I've really enjoyed is things like buying from a farm shop or something like that traditionally would never have thought about selling online, but now they're being forced to because of the pandemic. They're figuring out how to do it, and they're getting access to a whole bunch of new customers. So I'm getting a really good new product that I wouldn't have been able to get to otherwise. And so, I can see a lot of innovation coming at the smaller end of the market for people that just really wouldn't have thought e-commerce was for them previously.
So it's almost democratizing commerce for people who might not have otherwise been able to access customer bases, which is very interesting. Do please continue to submit questions. We have a good pipeline here, but I want to get through as many as we possibly can in the time that we have. So if you have a question that's sort of hot on your mind that you want the audience, that you want the panelists to answer, then do feel free to continue submitting. We've still got time to ask plenty of questions, I think. One that we have here is asking about your opinions of combining blockchain technology and hydrogen technology and basing the supply chain on that. I don't know if any of you have an opinion on the future of blockchain or hydrogen technologies and innovations around those spaces at all.
Well, I've not heard of anybody trying to combine the two technologies just yet. But interestingly, I have seen some developments around the use of blockchain for one of the topics we sort of talked about, and that sort of understanding provenance and the sort of embodied carbon throughout the supply chain. If you can use a distributed public ledger to see what's happened at every stage of the supply chain for a particular product, then that's a technology that could be used to give people much better information about what goes into their product and the sustainability of it. That could be used to make smarter decisions and to truly understand. We've talked a lot about electric vehicles, but Thomas touched on there, the lithium and things that go into electric vehicles. There's somewhat questionable sustainability credentials for them. And the hydrogen supply chain could be something that really helps take vehicles to be much more sustainable than battery-powered vehicles. So I see that quite some way out yet. I was aware that we'd probably be seeing hydrogen taxis in Tokyo this summer, but the Olympics have been postponed, so maybe we'll see that next summer.
We've got perhaps a slightly challenging question that's just come through. So one of our audience says, you haven't spoken much so far today about diversity. How important is diversity to effective innovation? Thomas, it looks like you're reaching to unmute.
Yeah, well, I think it's very important. I often tell my team, I want to hear from them because we all come from different backgrounds. We come from different areas of the country. We went to different schools, different cultures. All of our minds can come together to come up with a better scenario. We may not take any single person's idea and move forward with it, but 2 or 3 ideas may spark an idea in and of itself that can be merged and come out with something totally different that none of us individually thought about. I don't think you can do that with a group of people that grew up on the same block, if you know what I mean. I think diversity is required.
I totally agree with Thomas. And when it comes to innovation, very important to have different perspectives. So not only different cultures, but also in terms of the ecosystem that surrounds you. It's very important that the more rich it is, the more ideas you will get. Building also on diversity when it comes to women in STEM, being an engineering. I know this is a challenge also that we are facing in globally, but I think it's something that is in the agenda 2030, and where all the countries are really concerned with this. And Ayming when contributing a lot on this. So I think it's very important, not all types of diversity and innovation, as I had already said, because you need all perspectives to succeed. So yes, indeed, it's a very interesting topic.
If I could, I'd like to also add one area that I think is important as well is it's not just diversity in people, it's diversity in their educational backgrounds. So I've actually recently been a part of a group called Open Dance Project that teaches STEM through dance, and it sparks ideas for individuals who may not do well with dance, and vice versa. It sparks ideas through the artistic side with individuals who may not be very artistic. So the bottom line is it expands our imagination and it helps people learn. And I think that's very important. So when we talk about diversity, I think it should also be diversity in our education as well, as far as like an engineer and someone who's not necessarily an engineer.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Absolutely. A question that's just come through asks, will the coronavirus crisis mean governments reduce their innovation financing initiatives, or will they instead be looking to R&D to get them through the crisis? I don't know, Mark, perhaps if you wanted to tackle this one first.
Yeah, sure, Dan, I can pick this one up. Yeah, it's definitely particularly acute in the UK with the Conservative government we have at the moment. You know, back almost right at the beginning of the crisis, you know, they were trumpeting spending an awful lot more on innovation and R&D, and they actually increased the incentive rates in the UK. But since then, they've had to spend a tremendous amount of money on things like furlough and job protection schemes and other stimulus packages to help cover the coronavirus. And you know, being a conservative or a right-wing party, you know, they're traditionally the party of fiscal responsibility, and so you know, there's clearly a lot of voices there calling for, you know, bringing the public finances back into order, and those two things, you know, they don't really gel very well. So, you know, I can see governments being put under a lot of pressure to rein in spending across the board, and R&D and innovation could well be an area that they look to save money. But I think it's really a false economy, because you know, we absolutely need to invest now for the future, and that is an area that I absolutely would encourage them not to look to save money.
Yes, the same. I totally agree. And it's the case of the EU, as I already said before. And for instance, in the case of Spain, is very concerned. All governments during the pandemic, in May or April, they have announced different funding opportunities for companies. But today, what we see is for the future years, that's also the trend. In the case of Spain, yesterday, the government announced an increase of 80% of the national budget for R&D. This is very important because, as I said before, people, society, and companies are more aware of the impact of innovation, R&D, and science on facing the challenges like this pandemic. So I would say that yes, there is an opportunity here.
Great. And another potentially slightly controversial question for you. Somebody's asked which countries you think are set up the best to innovate their way out of the current situation, I suppose, around coronavirus and any economic fallout from that. Thomas, you look particularly amused, so I might ask you to answer first.
You know, I mean, I think many companies many countries are set up to deal with it. They just need to focus on doing it and focus their energies, including my own, on conquering it instead of debating how they're going to do it and who's going to do it. That's what sparked my smile. I think that many countries have the capability, they have the funding, they have the talent. They just need to do it.
I think there are some locations that we all know that the US, like the US or the UK and Germany, that are very good have very good R&D and innovation ecosystems. But there are also opportunities in other European countries, such as Spain, France, and with the next generation EU instrument by the EU Commission, we will see new opportunities. So I would say there is a balance. You need to not only look at the talent and the ecosystem that you could find in some countries, but also in opportunities, funding opportunities and other types of talent that we have already said. The diversity also in terms of location could be also an opportunity. So this is a more political, let's say diplomatic answer, I guess.
Very diplomatic indeed. There's a question that is specifically around the EU here. A couple of people have asked about particular types of technologies and how best to kind of find funding for them. For instance, one person has asked about waste treatment using plasma, and if that's a good solution, how might the EU help them to fund development of these kinds of new technologies? Is there an easy place that people can go and look for this type of funding when they have a new technology on offer?
Sorry, yeah. Thomas,
oh, sorry, Laura. I didn't completely understand what the technology was.
Yes, that was my question also.
Yeah.
So we've had a few. One particular instance was waste treatment using plasma. This is certainly outside of my own area of expertise. So, but I think the person asking suggests that it could be a green way of treating waste in the future.
Sure. So I know in the States we actually have a website that lists grants available. Grants in the States, at least, are not as prolific or available as much as in other countries. We rely more on the research credit itself, but there are some grants available, particularly if it is for a environmental aspect, like you're suggesting, or the way this project sounds. So I would recommend taking a look there if it's in the States. If not in the States, then I'll leave it to my colleagues across the pond to.
Yes, regarding the EU, definitely health and green are two of the trends that the EU Commission is intending to fund, and there are different programs. Even if either you are a large company or a small business, there are different programs that you could apply for. And is for instance, the EIC accelerator for SMEs is very interesting here. So also, but sometimes EU Commission programs like Horizon Europe are quite complex. You will need some help here. Maybe you could rely on us, but also don't miss the national opportunities that are going to come and are also in place in many countries regarding the EU. And I let Mark complete with regards to the UK.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's that technology would definitely fit with pillars of the industrial strategy in the UK, and it's very likely there'll be competitions for grants that they could get access to national funding in the UK. It still remains to be seen what happens with whether the UK participates in the next phase of the European funding for Horizon Europe, because the current phase is coming to an end. It's definitely still up for negotiation. There's a strong lobby to maintain that, because the collaboration with our European partners is very useful for a lot of businesses in the UK. But everything's on the table with regards to the Brexit negotiation. So I'd certainly view UK-based focus on Innovate UK and UK grants first of all. Obviously, there are various R&D schemes, and fingers crossed that we'll have access to collaborate with European grants next year.
Great, and perhaps those people in the audience who've been asking questions on these specific technologies might want to get in touch after the session. It could be something to have as a kind of ongoing discussion. I think we've got time for one, maybe two last questions. One question here is which sectors are likely to benefit the most from COVID, and which you think face the biggest problems? And they've also asked how innovation could help overcome some of those problems. Laura, I think you look like you've got a good answer to that one.
Okay, yes, we have already seen that the trends during the pandemic. So some of the sectors that are related to digital, e-commerce, that we have already talked about a lot, have benefited from the pandemic, and it's going to be a trend that will be continue. On the other hand, those that were relying more on the supply chain, we all know that we're more concerned about this crisis, were more impacted. But on the other hand, we are seeing in our barometer that the trends that innovation in all sectors is going to be continuing increasing, and there are opportunities because of these national government plans that are going to invest, to put funds for this sector. So don't think there are some sectors that are suffering that are not going to be increasing in the next years to come, because we see these macro trends or macro projects that, for instance, the EU is going to fund that cover all industries, and but always that is always the projects that are related more to green, sustainability, innovation, and digital. It's very important.
Great, and Marco, Thomas, do you have anything else to add to that, or should I think we've got time for one last question otherwise?
Well, I can add my opinion to the mix. I think there are some obvious people that are, businesses that are going to win from this. People are spending an awful lot more time at home, they're spending more money online, they're using streaming services, etc. So businesses catering to those parts of the market are clearly going to be quite successful. But I would encourage a lot of businesses to look at the problems they face through the coronavirus pandemic, and see what new opportunities. We've all been forced to think very differently about how we cope with things. I would never have imagined I would have spent 9 months this year working from my study, and we'd just be just as effective doing that. But we've been forced to do it, and we found that it works. Construction is an industry that I work quite a lot with. And where you've got a lot of trades on site, and you can't socially distance very easily, you then need to look to new technologies. So rather than shutting down your construction site, you have to bring on new technology. So it could be more automation, it could be increased use of off-site manufacturing. The businesses that have been thinking, oh, these are great ideas, but that's sort of some way down down the line for us, they should then be accelerating those ideas and bringing them to the fore now. So I think that really presents an opportunity to actually invest in those new technologies that you've always been putting off as sort of too difficult, too hard, or too far down in the future.
Fantastic. That brings us really nicely to time. I want to thank the speakers and the panel here for your time today, and I think for your insights. They've been very, very interesting, at least to me, and to indeed everyone in attendance. I think we've had some great questions come in, and to the team that's helped set up this seminar overall. Anybody who wants to reach out, of course, and I think, as we mentioned, there are a couple of people who could who perhaps had questions that could be followed up with, then do, of course, feel free to reach out to the panelists. They've got their contact details on the slide there. And beyond that, I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and thanks once again for coming along.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.